Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, this is the virtual book launch for Grams and me, always together, never apart. I'm honored to have you all here as we celebrate the journey of love, loss, and legacy of our beloved grandmothers. And I'm excited now to talk about another topic of how expressive art forms can help us cope with loss and honor the memory of our loved ones. And so I'd like to now introduce my cousin, Latorial Faison, who is a talented poet and educator. Please join me in welcoming her to the virtual stage. All right.
Hello. Thank you.
Hello.
Thanks, Lynette, for having me. I'm excited to be here and be a part of
Thank
Grandma
you. Thank you so much. And please, tell the people just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, I am Latorial Faison, Black poet, author, educator, author of over 14 books, mainly poetry, but most recently, The Missed Education of the Negro, an examination of the Black segregated education experience in Southampton County, which is historical research. But aside from poetry, there's that book also. And I was born and raised in Southampton County. I'm also a 28-year military spouse, now a veteran military spouse. My husband and I have three sons, two adult, one 15, and we're currently residing in Virginia.
Yes, awesome. I didn't know 14 poems. Woo,
Yeah. I've been publishing books since 2001.
really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. See, so all this have so much in the family,
Mhm.
different authors and poets and literacy runs deep, right?
That's right. That's right.
Right. And speaking of that, I definitely wanted to, kind of get your insight being an author and an educator. And being that this is Black Children's Book Week. Again, shout out to Black Children's Book Week, which we are a sponsor of. But I definitely wanted to get your insight on, why is literacy important in our community, especially, amongst the youth, with it being Black Children's Book Week.
Yes, having grown up in my grandparents' house, books and the library were always important to me. The library down in Cortland, Walter Cecil Rawls Library, was one of my favorite places. The library in all of our schools was always my favorite place to go. So literacy, I knew the importance of it. But in terms of publishing, when I became an author, I think I became an author before I became an educator, or no, I can't remember which, but
Hmm.
maybe simultaneously. But one of the reasons that I started publishing was, one, I wanted to be able to put, my words, document my experiences. But a set of the books, a trilogy set of the books that I published, was 28 Days of Poetry Celebrating Black History. And one of the reasons, my mother-in-law, your cousin, was actually the reason that set of books came to be. She
Wow.
was an English professor, and I was writing these poems, but she gave me the idea. I mean, actually, she asked the question, why don't you write some poems that we could actually share in school, that we could share in classes? And I thought about it. And when we think about what's going on with Black books and literacy right now, and literature for us, this was back in 2001. And even in 2001, I was thinking, I could write poems, autobiographical poems about, famous Black people that teach children about, iconic African Americans. And so that is how that three-book set came to be. And I started taking that book as early as when I had only one of them, because I published the first book in the first volume in 2001, and then like 2 years later another one came, and then another came. So there's three volumes in that set. But I literally, every February through April, take those books into schools, into churches,
Wow.
into communities. And it's poetry, but it also promotes literacy and literacy awareness.
Mhm.
uh, reading is a challenge for kids, for many kids, and for various reasons. Poverty and socioeconomic status is definitely a barrier, but some of our children just have challenges, learning challenges. And
Yeah.
so poetry is fun because it is easy to read. It rhymes. A kid can look at a poem and not get overwhelmed because it's short. And just seeing the kids light up when I read a poem about Phyllis Wheatley or Frederick Douglass or Booker T. Washington, or just, anybody that they can learn about it, in just a few stanzas. And it's not hard. And, so I think it really promotes literacy, and it also encourages kids that they can read. Students like to memorize poems, and to see
Mhm.
a poem and to see a kid's, my poems have been used in schools from New York to California to down far south as Florida, Kansas, Arkansas, and sometimes people send me videos. I think more recently, a student, a school up in New York, a private school, they took one of my poems and put a bunch of students together, and they put together a slide presentation, and they acted the poem out. So
Oh,
there were some kids in Texas who did my Buffalo Soldiers poem. So it always does my heart really good to know that the poems are actually doing what I sent them out in the world to do. And it's really to make kids like to read. Um,
yes, yes.
so
And I'm
promoting that. I mean, if I can do that through poetry, but that, I don't know that that was my initial reason for writing poetry. Poetry was more of a healing. I need to get things out of me onto the page. But
yes.
those three books were definitely what took me into schools, what made me focus on, younger readers, and
Mhm.
make it more attractive to them, making poetry more attractive, but also making learning about Black history more
I
attractive.
guess the theme of our children's book, love and legacy and healing from grief is, those themes that we aim to cover with Grams and Me. So I was just curious, I wanted to talk with you about your experience in using art forms to express your love and heal and remember your loved ones, similar to what we did in writing.
Wow, when I think about poetry and my writing, the fact that it all happened in my grandmother's house. I was grandparent raised. And
Mm,
so even though the beginning of my writing and art was about falling in love with poetry as a little kid, reading the basic poems, reading the Langston Hughes and the Maya Angelou, but also using poetry as an outlet to kind of have a voice. When you're raised by older people, a lot of times you were seen and not heard,
mm,
and you spoke when spoken to. And so that was the era in which I grew up. And so a lot of the things, the feelings that you had, you couldn't verbalize them, you had to put them on paper. And so that's how I got my start in poetry. But no doubt it happened in my grandmother's house. And so thinking about your theme, I've always used poetry as a way to express myself, but in keeping with your theme of, coping with grief and remembering those who we have grieved, uh I never imagined that poetry would I would use it in that way. And so, I lost my grandmother suddenly in 2008
mm,
to pancreatic cancer, and it was suddenly, it was within 3 months. And so I didn't grieve well. I did not grieve well. I made myself sick. And my first inclination was not to write
mm.
because you're grieving. But
Yeah.
I do remember, even when she passed in 2008, I had been established as someone who did poetry. And I just remember being at her funeral. And when people saw my name on the obituary to do reflections, they just knew I was going to get up there and do a poem. They just knew. And I wanted to, but I couldn't. I
Mm,
just couldn't, because I didn't, any poem just wouldn't do for her. I mean, it just couldn't
mm,
be some poem I threw together like the night before, or on death. I wanted whatever poem that I wrote about her uh to be iconic.
mm.
Like
And what's her name? What's her name?
her name was Shirley Lee Turner Williams. She was born in Cortland, Virginia in 1932. Her mother died when she was young, so she was raised by her uncle and her
Mm,
uncle's wife, along with their children. So she was raised in a family of about, 10 or 11, 10 or 11. And there
wow.
are a few of her siblings left now, but she was an amazing individual. She was a Black Southern cook. She cooked in the school cafeteria. She drove a school bus. She brought me up in church. Pretty much everything I know about being a strong Black woman came from her and my other grandmother. And so I come from this matriarchal line where women are strong. But education was key in her house. And so it was because of her that I ended up in a library, because of her that I love books, because of her that I became a strong student because she always encouraged it and literally and supported me in everything that I did. So when I wrote this poem, even though I was grieving, I knew that the poem that I would write about her, and I've written many poems about her, but I wanted this one that represented her to be amazing. It was 2008 when she passed. People were expecting a poem. I was expecting a poem, but that poem for her did not come until 2012.
Wow.
We left here. My grandfather passed in 2012, and we moved overseas. I still hadn't really written that poem. I think I had maybe started it when Daddy passed. He had Alzheimer's. And when we went to Korea, that's where I was finalizing it. And I remember finalizing that poem finally, and I just couldn't believe finally I've done it. But I also, there was a lot of regret in finishing the poem. It helped me through the grief, but I regret it. I felt like I had missed some opportunity of doing that poem at her funeral. And I carried a heaviness about it. Like, why did it take 4 years for this poem to come? But so I started submitting that poem everywhere.
Wow.
Everywhere. And finally, okay, I finished it in 2012. I was sharing it, I was submitting it, but it wasn't until 2017, 5 years after the writing. And I'll tell you, it was 5 years of editing this poem and changing it because the words had to be right. And you'll see as I read it why the words had to be right. There's so much of where I grew up in this poem. But I finally submitted that poem, and that poem won Winning Writers Tom Howard Poetry Contest. There were over 3,000 entries in the nation, and I won first place with that poem. And it was titled "Mama Was a Negro Spiritual," and there was just that title is everything that she was, and probably a whole lot of other Southern Black grandmothers. But I was really proud of the title. And looking back, some poets write good poems all the time. This is one of my best. It's one of my best. It's one of the poems that I'm most absolutely proud of. When I read it, I mean, I'm so in tune with it. And it's proof that, what we do in terms of artists, it is healing. Not only is it healing for us, but it's healing for other people. I've had so many other people who lost their grandmas say, I saw my grandma in this.
Yes.
Even white people, they're like, this was my grandma.
Right.
We had people from like the Middle East, like, read this poem, but they can see pictures of their mothers and their grandmothers in it. And that's what this poem is about. And so, I've paid tribute to Mama so many times with this poem, but, if I want to just, remember her, I can always pull this poem up. And as you'll find it online in tons of places, but it's been anthologized in a number of places. And I told you it's gonna lead this poem. This poem, I told you how it started as a way to cope with grief, but also a way to honor her, to pay tribute to her. And I should tell you how many years it took for it to come. So after this poem finally won the prize, then I made an entire collection out of it. So I wanted the collection to be Mama Was a Negro Spiritual as well. I took the poem, made that the collection title, and I shopped that collection around for a whole year. It didn't get selected by anybody. And I'm a self-published author, so I knew if it doesn't get published, I can self-publish it. But I knew that this poem was special, that this collection was special because it kind of like it documents place where we grew up. So much of Cortland and Southampton County in this book. So I didn't want to self-publish it because when you go with another publisher, you just get more exposure. You're able to get more exposure. And so I shopped it around for a year. It didn't get selected. It made finalists in a couple of places. The poem was making finalists. And so I said, okay, maybe the word Negro in the title is too strong of a word for 2020, for the new millennium. So there was another poem in the book, Nursery Rhyme in Black, that also was a finalist for a prize. So I started to shop this collection around with the two titles. And this year was this poem's year, 2023. This year was that collection's year. So the University of Alaska, this book, this collection, Mama Was Negro Spiritual, under another title, Nursery Rhyme in Black, was selected by Amy Netsu Kumata Teal, who is an amazing poet. She selected this book to win the Permafrost Poetry Prize in
Wow.
2023. So, as a result of that, the University of Alaska will publish this book this year in 2024. But when I won that prize, I had to go withdraw the book from all the other places that I had submitted it. And I found out that the book had made finalists in at least three other places. Some
Wow.
places were like, you were gonna win. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
I was just so happy that this year was this book's time, 2023.
Mm,
So I'm excited about that release this year. I'm not sure when it will be released, but it will be released in 2024.
that's awesome, and to hear the journey of when it started. And similar, same with like our book. We started writing this a couple of
Hmm.
years back, and so
Hmm.
it's interesting, and to hear that things take time.
Yeah.
Just as grieving takes time, right?
And
Um,
it was written out of grief and loss
hmm
and the desire to pay honor to and tribute to. So the fact that my first book that's going to be published by an academic publisher,
hmm
it has its roots in mama, so it couldn't get any
yes,
more special than that, right? It's like it's
right.
it's like it's fate. It was meant to be. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And we're gonna get to your poem in just a second. And just one last question of like advice. So if anybody's listening that may be into poetry, or we're talking about, I guess, less generalized art.
Hmm.
It could be painting, it could be dance, any type of expressive art. Just any advice on how to explore
Yes,
that?
yes. Becoming an artist, people don't just become artists. You do it first off because you find out that you have a knack for it, that you have a talent for it. But I have seen people who go into art, various types of arts, who maybe didn't appear as talented, but they worked on it. They
Mhm.
taught themselves. And so there's two ways to approach art. You can do it the learned way. You can be someone who has natural talent, but even if you have natural talent, you still need to work at it. So
Yeah.
for me as a writer, the books that I wrote in 2001 are definitely nothing like the books that I'm writing now, but it shows growth. And so my advice is whatever it is you want to do, whatever art form it is, find someone who's doing it. See what they did, see what road they took. Everybody has a different road, but you can learn from other people.
Yeah.
You want to look for mentors, and mentors are not always people who are present, people who can spend the time. Sometimes a mentor is like someone that you can watch from afar. I've always
Yeah.
been a fan of like Nikki Giovanni, Maya Angelou, just different types of writer. So I started getting involved in the Black poetry scene, finding out who's who in contemporary poetry, what they're doing. And so I found out that you have academic poets and you have non-academic poets. And for a while, I didn't know quite where I fit because I'm an academic and I'm a poet, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm an academic poet.
Yeah.
If you're not in this arena, then you don't know that an academic poet is someone who actually studied poetry, who has maybe an MFA,
Hmm.
a degree in creative writing. I don't. I have a degree in English, and of course, I came to some poetry by way of both degrees. But
Interesting.
in a sense, I'm not really an academic poet, but there are academic poets out here who write and they've learned the craft. So I would certainly say, whatever it is you think you want to do, whether it's publishing, writing, drawing,
Hmm
painting, learn the craft, surround yourself with people who are doing it and find out what makes them better. Nikki Giovanni says all the time, if you want to be a better writer, one, write what you know. Write what you know. You can't write what somebody else knows.
Right.
So this, most of what I write is about my experience or what I see, what I observe. But the other thing is, in order to improve your writing, you have to read other writers. And so I would say those are the two things that have really helped me. Writing what I know, not trying to do something that's not mine, but also reading as much as I can of other people, studying how they do a thing, because
Mm.
you learn that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Great tips for anybody, again, watching. And hopefully you're inspired, by what you heard. And before we hear the poem, I guess, is there any way, or just let everyone know how they can get connected with you, or experience more of your work?
Okay, well, you can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter. I'm on
Yes.
Instagram. I'm literally everywhere. I have a website. It's latorialfaison.com. You can literally find me on LinkedIn as well. For those of you who are in business, all of my books are available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. And if you see books and you'd like to get personal copies from me, I'm only an email away. And so you can always get in contact with me through social media to get autographed books, or if you're interested in having me come read at your school, your church, or do any private events, because I've done private events. But you can definitely find me. Thank you.
Awesome, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Latorial is going to take us to break by reading her poem that is dedicated to her lovely grandmother, right? So thank you again, Latorial, for taking your time to chat with me, to chat with us, to celebrate the book launch, and for just all your expertise and guidance, behind the scenes of, just helping coach me. I really appreciate it. So I wanted to let you know that for sure.
Thank you.
And
And congratulations on your book and your project. You're doing an amazing job.
thank you. Yes, it's definitely a village, but we're excited, to finally be here. Like you mentioned the journey, right? But we're
Yes.
excited to finally be here. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to take myself off, and you're going to have the stage to yourself.
All right.
All right.
The poem's title is Mama Was a Negro Spiritual. It won the Winning Writers Tom Howard Poetry Prize in 2018. She was a goodnight prayer, a moon that shined down on me through her bedroom window. She was the alphabet, a Sunday school verse, a third Sunday gospel song to rehearse, a mostly misunderstood exchange of power, responsibility, and commands. She was a black 73 Ford LTD, a Nottoway River crossing, a house filled with too many other folks' children, an orphan that life and death left behind to find some joy. She was a funeral going, everybody in Southampton County knowing, bad manner destroying pillar of strength. She was a Friday evening ride to town, a Saturday morning cleaning, a Sunday go to meeting kind of human being. She laughed louder than Jim Crow's law and cried softer than God's peace. She was the secret I never told, sworn and born for the claiming, the carrying of some other man and woman's burdens. She was rare and uncut, unpolished, and ripped from some earthen mine, placed beneath a sharecropper's vine to bear witness, to bear it all deep down inside. She was a black hearse, a deaf man walking, a raising and waving of both hands. She was thunder, she was lightning, a heavy rain that fell in spring. She was an informal education, small town syndication, her house a book, and she the words penned fervently, permanently on all its pages. She was a Ridley Road scholar, a kitchen where cooking was always done and well. She was Miss Shirley, the lunch lady, the bus driver, Daddy's wife, giver of too much self. Mama was a Negro spiritual, a hymn hum from inside a Baptist hymnal in her old rocking chair from a corner of our living room. She was a wisdom no man could whistle, a fancy no woman could fake, a journey nobody living in the now could take. She was an old fashioned lyric that everybody could lift their voice and sing.